Hey, how's it going guys? This is Max here, back with another super fun retro game building tutorial using JavaScript and Kaboom JS on Replit.com. Today we'll be building Space Invaders, which was one of the first retro hit games of all time. And you should really enjoy it, so let's go ahead and get started building Space Invaders. So before we get started, I'd just like to point you guys over to this text-based tutorial here, which the video tutorial is based off of. It is on the Replit documentation, although I will also provide a link in the description of the video for you. So you can see as we code along here, this tutorial will show you each block of code and give you detailed explanations. And you can essentially copy each section of code out and paste it into your project. Or you can pause the video and you can copy the code out just like that. Either way should be perfectly fine, whichever you prefer. So definitely go ahead and check out the text-based tutorial. And with that out of the way, let's get going and let's start to code Space Invaders. Alright, so the next step is to head over to replit.com. And you can go ahead and create a new REPL. We're going to use the Kaboom JS template. So go ahead and choose that. And for our title, we can call this Space Invaders Tutorial. Just like that. And we can create the REPL. So that should create the REPL for you, which would just take a second. And it'll open up your IDE where your code is in the middle with some boilerplate, which you can delete. And we're going to go ahead and paste in our first bit of code, which is just going to initialize our Kaboom context for us. And we are basically just setting a background with a width and height, setting the scale to 1, and enabling our debugging tools, which can be very useful. So if you run this project, you should just see a nice black background for now. So the next step would be to add our sprites. So let's go ahead and do that. So if you head back over to the text-based tutorial, you can see this sprite section over here, where we will use our load sprite atlas method to load our sprites. And you can get your sprites folder from this link over here. So go ahead and click that link and you should get your sprites folder. Once you have that, you can go ahead to your folder system on the left. And we've already got sounds and sprites folders in here, so you can go ahead and delete those. And make sure that you replace these with the newly generated sprites folder that you've just downloaded. So make sure you go ahead and do that. So once you have your sprites in your sprites folder, you can have a look. We've got alien sprites over here. So this is obviously the alien sprites over here. You can see that there's 2 of them, which will be used to create a little animation illusion. And the one on the right here will be used when an alien is killed or gets exploded, essentially. And we've got the same thing here for our player. So if we go back to our main file, we can go ahead and load in our sprites. So we're using the load root method to specify sprites as our root folder for sprites. Then we're using load sprite atlas to specify this PNG file, which contains the alien sprites, to essentially load the sprites and give it custom properties over here, which we will be using when we give our sprite objects our tags, basically. And you can have a look at this cool little animation property we have over here for each one. So for our alien sprites, we've got flying and exploding animations, which specify basically points on the map and speed to which those animations will happen, and the same thing for our player sprite. Next thing we're going to want to do is create our game scenes. So I'll just say game scenes over here. Right, so a scene is essentially a collection of logic, or you can think of a scene as a level in the game. But basically we have a main game scene, which will obviously be the main scene of our game, which we will go to over here using the go method. And we also have this game over scene, which will take in a score parameter, which we will obviously use to calculate the player's score. And we will get there, but for now we are going to be worrying about our main game scene. Alright, so the next thing we can do is add our player object into the game. So I'll just say over here, player object. And very simply, we are setting a constant called player equal to the add method from Kaboom, which accepts an array of properties. So we are giving this player object the sprite of player. So that's obviously going to use the player sprite as a reference. We're giving it a scale of 1, and we're specifying origin center, which will essentially cause whatever movement we give the player object to come from the center of that object. We're using the pos method to give it an initial starting position, and we've got some custom properties in here that we're adding, namely the score of the player and the player's lives. And finally, we give it over here the tag of player so that we know that this is indeed the player object. Then we're also going to call the play method on the player object, which is essentially going to play our custom animation, which we specified over here, which is the move animation whenever we move. So let's just stop and run our project. So we've gone to the main scene of our game now, and you can see at the bottom we've added our player object. Of course, it doesn't do anything for now, but it's cool that he is there. So the next thing we can do is start to add the aliens into the game. And in order to do this, we're going to need a couple of constants. So at the top of our file, I'm just going to say constants. And we're going to need a couple of these in order to get our aliens spawning. So essentially what these constants will do is be used inside a loop. It's actually going to be a nested loop, and the way we're going to generate these aliens is by using these constants within those loops. And basically we've got a rows variable, which is obviously how many rows we want, columns variable for how many columns we want. We've got width and height for each one, and the offset for X and Y will basically determine how far away from the top or left of the screen we want our aliens to spawn. So now that we have these constants available to us for spawning our aliens, we can now go back to our main scene, and below where we've done this player object logic over here, we can say spawn aliens. And if you have a look over here, you can also use this nice auto formatter over here to format your code nicely. And basically the way we're going to do this is we're going to have an alien map array, and we're going to basically fill this array as a matrix, meaning if you look over here, we've got the row and the column array indexes on our alien map, which we're going to fill, obviously relating to our rows and columns. And then we've got a nested loop inside our spawn aliens function that is essentially going to use our constants that we created up at the top of the file. And basically it's a nested loop, like I said. So this one we're checking alien rows, and in the inner loop we are checking alien columns to populate basically the aliens inside this alien function. And the way we do that is we get X and Y coordinates using our constants, and then we add the alien using the add method. We want to give it the alien sprite. We want to scale them up a bit, give it the tag of alien, and then we've got custom properties to set the rows and columns of each individual alien. Then we're playing this cool flying animation on the alien object. And then this is where we're going to set the alien map matrix basically to equal the alien that we just added. And then finally we're going to call our spawn aliens function, just like that. So providing you've got your constants available to you and you've got this logic inside the main scene of your game and you're calling your spawn aliens function, you should be able to run your project. And you can see that we have our flying aliens spawning right there in the top of the screen in the center. Nice. Right, so now that we have our player added to the game with our player object and we've got our sprite loading for the player, let's try to enable the player movement. So we're going to need a few more constants for this. So I'll just organize these a bit better by saying over here, these are for aliens, and these will be for player movement. And we're going to need a player move speed constant, which will represent the player's movement speed, obviously. Then we've got this screen edge constant, which will make a margin around the screen to represent how far we want that edge of the screen to be. So now that we've got our player constants for movement, let's go ahead and add the logic for our player movement. So we've got our spawn alien function here with our call here. So let's go into here and say player movement. Right. And let's just format this a little bit. So we have this pause variable, which we will use a little bit later to basically stop the player after he gets shot. And besides that, we've pretty much just got on key down listeners for left and right arrow presses. And we pass in our arrow function to each of these. If our pause variable is true, we won't do anything, so we will not allow the player to move. But if that is not the case, then we will do a check basically on the player object, specifically on the x-axis, because we can pretty much only move left or right. So as long as we are not on the edge of the screen, which we've determined with that constant obviously, then we will allow the player to move using this move method, which comes from the pause object, which we attached to our player, if you remember. So this move method, which comes from the pause object, will allow us to move. And if we move left, we want to subtract, so hence -1, multiplied by our move speed constant. And if we want to go right, then we simply use our player move speed and add that to our move method, and that should allow us to move our player around. So if we give our project a run, let's just give it a bit more space here so we can see our player, and we can now press right and left, and we can successfully move our player right and left. And of course, we would reach the screen edge variable and not be able to move any further. So in order to get our aliens to move, they're going to want to move themselves, obviously. So we're going to need a couple more constants for that. So let's go up to our constants and let's add these. Got an alien speed constant, alien steps, and an alien rows move. And they're quite self-explanatory. Basically, we're going to be using these when we add our logic right now to move these aliens. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go back down to our main scene. So we've done our player movement here. Let's go down here and say alien movement. So we're going to have a couple of flags here, and these are going to be used inside our logic along with our constants. But the difference is these can be changed, whereas our constants will remain the same. So we've got alien direction, which is set to 1. We're basically going to set this either to 1 or to -1 to determine which direction the alien should move in. Then we've got an alien move counter variable to keep track of how many times the alien moves. And then we've got alien rows moved to keep track of how many times the alien goes into a new row. So now that we have our flags in place, let's go ahead and implement the logic for the alien movement. Let's just go a little bit down here and let's just make this a bit more readable. Alright, so we are running an onUpdate method which will run on every frame that our game runs. So if the pause variable is true, we're going to stop that onUpdate method and simply not do anything. And we're using this every method from Kaboom here to check our alien tags. Well, all of our alien tags. And then we're going to use the move method again to move our aliens using our alien direction, which will be 1 by default. And multiplying that by our speed will move our alien in the exact way that we want. So every time this happens, we want to add 1 to our counter variable to keep track of that, of course. Then we've got a check here to say if our counter variable is less than our constant for our alien steps, then we're going to set our alien direction back to the other direction, right? Then we also want to reset our counter, and then we're going to call this function over here called move aliens down, which we are declaring over here. So that will do exactly that, basically calling the every method on every alien tag and moving it by our block height variable, which will essentially be the size of one alien, and we just want to move it down 1 row. So that will move every alien down by 1 row according to these checks here, right? If you look over here, if we reach the maximum number that we want the aliens to move, if the aliens do reach that point, the bottom of the screen, what we want to do is then pretty much end our game. So the reason for that is the aliens have reached the end point of the screen and the game will be over if this is the case. So the player would have lost the game. So we will use this explode animation on the player to explode him, and we will simply go to our game over scene. And we're just waiting 2 seconds by using the wait method from Kaboom in order to do that. And we want to pass in our player score, obviously, to display that in our game over screen. So I believe that should be all the logic we need for our alien movement. So if we run our project, and you can see now that our aliens are moving very slowly right and left, and also down across the screen every time it hits the left or right side. And of course, if it gets to the end, then that's game over. Cool. So the next thing we can do is we can allow our player to shoot. In order to achieve that, you can see he just died because the aliens reached the end of the screen, so it's good that that's working. So let's go back to our constants here, and let's just add this gun cooldown time constant, and by default this will just be 1. So we're going to use this in our player shooting logic, which we will implement now. Right, so let's go down to our main scene, and underneath our move aliens down function, let's say player shooting, right?
So the way that we will achieve our
Player shooting is by having a last shoot time variable, which will be equal to the Kaboom time function, which will essentially just get the total time from the beginning. And we're going to use this inside our onKeyPress handler, which listens for a space. And we're doing our regular pause check, so if pause is true, we don't want to fire this off. Otherwise, we go to our next check where we are using the time method again and subtracting our last shoot time, which is set up here. And we're saying if that is less than our gun cooldown time constant, which we set up at the top, then we're going to reset that last shoot time variable back to the time method again. And then we're going to call this spawn bullet function over here, which will accept a bullet position, a bullet direction, and a tag. And the way we spawn the bullet is simply by using the add method, which accepts an array of parameters, creating a little rectangle. We're giving it the pos. We're giving it the pos of our bullet pos, which we will pass in here, of course. And we're giving it the tag of missile. We want to pass the tag in. And we have this custom property here, direction, which we will also pass into the function. So we're going to spawn that bullet according to our last shoot time check here. And we're going to pass in our player position, -1 as our direction, and bullet as the tag. So this logic here will spawn our bullets for us, but we need them to shoot. So we're going to need one more constant. And this constant will be our bullet speed constant. So we're going to use that now to basically use an onUpdate method to check the missile tag, which is created whenever we actually shoot a bullet. So underneath our spawn bullet, let's add this onUpdate where we check the missile tag, which we create here, of course. We pass in the missile, do our pause check, and if the pause check is not relevant, then we're going to call the move method to move our missile, right? Nice. And of course, we're using our bullet speed constant to determine the bullet speed. So I believe we should be able to shoot now. So let's go ahead and test this out. So let's run our project. And let's see if our spawn bullet and our onUpdate methods are working. So we move around and nice. So we can shoot and our shooting is limited depending on our cooldown time, just as expected. But we cannot kill our aliens yet because we haven't handled our collisions yet. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to need one more constant in order to implement that. And that'll go under the aliens constants. And that's going to be the number of points we're going to get per alien when we kill them. So we're going to use this now in our onUpdate method where we're going to check our collisions for bullets and aliens. So let's go back down. And after the player shooting section that we've done over here, let's go down here and say alien and bullet collisions. So we're going to use a onCollide method from Kaboom. We're checking a bullet tag, which we've created from our bullets, against the alien tag, of course. We pass those in as parameters. And in the case that a bullet collides with an alien, we want to destroy the bullet, of course. We're going to play our cool exploding animation. And we're going to use this lifespan method in order to fade that alien out of the game, which is pretty cool. And then we have to select that specific alien using our matrix here. And we're going to set that specific alien instance to null to mark the alien as dead. And finally, we're going to use our update score method to update our score, which we will do now, using our points per alien constant that we just created. So let's go ahead and implement that. Let's go ahead and go right underneath our collision detection there. And we can add the next section. Pretty much we're just going to add our score screen in here with the add method. And then we have a score text variable where we use the add method again to set the actual score text. We want to set a layer for this, which will be the UI layer. And then we've got this update score function, which takes in a points value. And we're pretty much just going to add that points value onto the player object and obviously the score text as well. Now, if we give our project a run, we should be able to shoot our aliens. They should explode and our score should increase by our score constant variable, right? So let's test it out. Nice. So we're able to kill the aliens. Ooh, let's go quickly. And our score is updating successfully. Nice one. Cool. So the next thing we can do is allow our aliens to fight back. So in order to achieve this, we need to add the following logic. So I'll just say over here, aliens fighting logic. So we're going to use a loop, which is a loop method from Kaboom, which will run every 1 second. And we're going to check our pause variable. If it's true, we will just stop the function. Then we're going to set variables for rows and columns. If you remember how our aliens are laid out, they are indeed rows and columns. So we're pretty much just going to loop through the rows and columns and set our shooter variable over here to ensure that we select a random alien using this random method here to select a available alien to shoot. And if we do find that alien, basically we will use the spawn bullet function to spawn a bullet on that alien to allow him to shoot. So if you run your project now, you should be able to see your aliens shooting at you. So remember how this works is we're just finding an available alien. Right now they're all available, so they're all shooting. But if we killed one, of course, he wouldn't be able to shoot anymore. Cool, so the next thing we can do is cater for the instance of a bullet hitting the player. So we can just say bullet hits player over here. So we're going to use an onCollide again, but this time we're attaching it to the player object. So we want to check an alien bullet tag, right? So we pass in that bullet as a parameter, do our regular pause check again. Now in the case that the alien bullet does collide with a player, we want to destroy that bullet, which we can use destroy all to do. And we're going to use our exploding animation on the player to explode him, of course. And we're going to use this update lives function, which we'll create now, to subtract from our player lives. And we're going to set pause to true because the game will pretty much just pause momentarily because we have lost a life. And then if we don't have any lives left, we're going to go to our game over screen. Otherwise, we'll just set the player back to his original position, right? Cool. In order for this to work, we're going to need our update player lives functionality. So let's add this. So we're going to add our lives to our UI here. And we're pretty much going to add the text in the same way into the UI layer. And then we've got our update lives function, which will take in a life parameter. And pretty much we're just going to use that life parameter to update our player lives value. And then we're finally just going to set the text as well to that value. Cool, so that all makes sense. Now the last thing we're going to need to finish off our game is our game over screen. So remember, this is all our main game scene. So if we can go down here to our game over scene, we can simply go here and add our game over screen. So we are adding the game over text, same way we did to the UI layer. Same with the score, so the player can see his score upon the ending of the game. And we want to give the player the option to go back to the game or restart the game, of course, on the game over screen. Nice, so that is our game over screen logic, and that should complete our game for us. So if we run our project one final time, let's test everything out. So we got moving, shooting, we can kill our aliens. Make sure you dodge those bullets. Of course our aliens explode, and let's try to get hurt. Ooh, so the player explodes and we lose a life. And let's try to kill the player, unfortunately, to test our game over screen. Nice, so we get our game over screen. Cool guys, so that's going to do it for our Space Invaders tutorial. I truly hope that you enjoyed this, as I certainly did. And I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching guys, and bye-bye.